If there's one word that I can use to describe how I'm feeling, how I think the fan base is feeling when it comes to the 49ers and what we've seen this season and kind of what we're going through as a fan base, it's exhausted. I'm Al Sacco. He's Brian Rennick. I don't know how exhausted Brian is. I'm really exhausted. Brian, is that a good word for you to use? Is that fair? Are you exhausted with this? Just how are you feeling today?
Exhausted is a great word. I think broken is another
It's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
another word. And I think if I really reflect on that word specifically, and we've touched on it, but I really do think that this last Super Bowl loss really kind of broke a lot of fans. Because we, as content creators, like we see numbers, right? And those numbers tanked after the Super Bowl. And I think broken or exhausted is exactly it, right? Like just for whatever reason. And I feel like football is the sport where this happens the most. I think the most rabid fans are football fans, right? I don't think like there are rabid baseball fans, but as a whole, I feel like football fans are far more rabid for their team and far more leaning into the fanatic side, right? Where you've got dudes in Buffalo when it's negative 12 degrees shirtless with, spelling out bills or, you know what I mean? Like you see that kind of stuff and you're like, that's wild. That's that's crazy. So, I think as passionate as football fans are, when you just constantly get kicked in the dick by your team because they lose the big games, you get exhausted, you get broken. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
When I look at the last 5 years or so, the Niners have been on the field. They've been really, really successful, but there's been some shit that's happened that I thought is covering this team. We always say, man, this was exhausting. And I'll explain what I mean. So if you go back to what was it, 2020, the 49ers treated Jimmy Garoppolo like shit. A lot of fans don't care because they were kind of done with Garoppolo. But when you look at how that all happened, they were flirted and were interested in every single quarterback imaginable that offseason and publicly. They did it publicly.
After being in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Did it? Jimmy Garoppolo.
Well, no, this was after 2020. So this was after the 6 and
10 you're saying after 2020.
Yeah. Got it. So they flirt with that. They're interested in everybody and it's public. And they have a trade package that they wanted for Watson until Watson had his legal trouble that they end up just, hey, we're going to trade up for a quarterback. And they probably make, well, I don't say the worst trade in NFL history, but certainly one of them, to give up multiple first round picks for Trey Lance, who's a third stringer on Dallas. He wasn't even on the team 2 years later. But they get through that. They find Purdy, even though that was a complete bust. And losing the picks hadn't hurt them until now. It's absolutely hurting them right now. But they were able to skate by. And then you see all this stuff with the contracts. Deebo Samuel acted like a Deebo with his contract. There's a holdout. And we'll get into a little bit more about Deebo because I have some other things to say about him too. Ayuk, a holdout, acting like a diva. Trent Williams sits out training camp. Nick Bosa sat out training camp last year and it hurt them early in the season. And maybe even now still with Williams, he's banged up and Ayuk wasn't himself. It just compounds. What it kind of reminds me of is that scene at the end of Wedding Crashers when Christopher Walken's talking to Bradley Cooper in the church. And he's like, listen, I put up with your stupid ass stories and all your bullshit because you made my daughter happy. So I was okay with it. I kind of feel that's where it was with the night. All this, we put up with the bullshit and the holdouts and the drama and all this other stuff. They're like a reality TV show because you were winning and we're happy as a fan base. You're winning.
Right.
But now, like you said, we've been kicked in the nuts a lot. We've been going up the mountaintop and falling flat on our face over and over and over again. And now it looks like you don't care. I know you're injured, but this performance in week 11, week 12, whatever it is, was an embarrassment on so many levels. So now that we're here, all these guys that you paid are injured or look disinterested or look old, and we've been through all this, we're kind of like, we're exhausted. And like you said, I think it shows in the numbers for content. I think it shows in just how fans are reacting. The fan base is like angry. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, you shouldn't be this angry after 5 successful seasons or 4 out of 5 successful seasons, but they are. Why? I just think they're exhausted.
Yeah. They're hangry, when you get really hungry, it's been 30 years since you won a Super Bowl and you've gotten there. It's been a tease for, 2012 and then 2019. And then, even even getting to the NFC Championship game against the Rams and losing, and then the Eagles and losing. And granted, they got there last year, but there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of emotional investment for fans in their football team, and it's going to cause, or it's going to take its toll on those fans. And I think football fans are quicker to turn on players and coaches than other sports, mainly because, again, football is so unique because there's just so few games to play.
Right.
And so, it's not like you can start off the season slow in baseball for the first month and then get on a heater in the last 2 months and end up in the playoffs, right? Like,
it's a marathon.
Football is a sprint, and it is, you look at a team like the Bengals, who lost all those close games in the beginning of the season. It's going to be very difficult for them to overcome that, even though they're one of the better teams in the NFL. Their defense isn't great, but their offense is phenomenal. And then you look at a team like the Washington Commanders, who banked a ton of wins in the beginning of the season. They're on a 3-game losing streak right now. The Kingsbury Cliff has appeared, as predicted by anybody who pays attention to Cliff Kingsbury's career, right? And their offense doesn't look nearly as good now. But they banked so many wins in the beginning of the season that they may find themselves kind of falling ass backwards into a wild card spot, just because, they played lights out those first 6, 7, 8 games. It's just, there's just so many things that have happened this season that just make you scratch your head about, like, what is this team thinking? What is Kyle Shanahan thinking? What are the players thinking? And it has certainly felt like the vibes, and it sounds stupid, but the vibes have been off from the jump, from training camp, with Ayuk holding out, all of that, with Trent Williams not being there. The vibes were off. And in the past, it's felt that way. And then they kind of shook it off. And then, they're in the NFC Championship game again. I don't think these are shakeable. I think they're going to get a mud hole stomped in them this Sunday against the Bills. And then you're in a spot where you've got 7 losses already, right? They're 5-6 now. I think they're going to be 5-7 after next week, regardless of whether Brock Purdy plays or not. Then you're at 5-7, which means that you've got to win your last 5 games to get to the playoffs. And though one of those games is against the Detroit Lions team that looks like the best team in the NFL.
Yeah.
One of those games is against a Dolphins team who looks a lot better now that Tua is back. Although played the Dolphins before, beat them. We know that. That's the start of the Brock Purdy legend. And then you've also got to play the Rams, who are going to play you tough. And you've also got to play the Cardinals, who are currently in second place, but with the same record as the Seahawks. The Seahawks hold the edge right now because they beat the Cardinals last
Bears
week.
Team with a really good defense.
And a Bears team with a really good defense and a hit and miss offense. So it just, I know for me, I've waved the white flag already. I have zero expectations that this team makes the playoffs. And honestly, I'd almost rather them not, because this certainly feels like a team that would be one and done in the playoffs. But at the same time, there's so much talent still on this team that they can make me look like an absolute dumbass by the end of the season, where all of a sudden something clicks and they take off. I don't know what that would be. I thought last week was, rock bottom, losing the way you did to your division rival who you had owned for the last 6 times you played them. I thought that was, the rock bottom. But even though you went into this game knowing that Brandon Allen was the quarterback, 38-10 is embarrassing. And the defensive effort was embarrassing. And this feels like rock bottom until next week when they lose like 55-9 or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be that bad. But I don't know.
I didn't expect them to win the game. I don't think anyone did. When you don't have Purdy, you don't have Bosa, you don't have Trent Williams. It's an uphill battle. You're probably not winning that, going into Green Bay and winning that game. But like you said, it's the product that they put on the field I expected them to have some fight. It was embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing. The defense missed 19 tackles and 10 tackles in the first quarter. They got pushed around on the lines, and I'm so tired of people. Not people, just I just want to say I'm so tired of hearing, well, their defensive stats are good. Well, they only gave up X amount of points. If you watch this defense, the secondary plays well when they're whole. The corners are good. The corners are good.
Yeah.
This team is typically built on the front seven. Their front seven is 2 studs and then a whole lot of hit and miss dudes.
Nothing. Yeah.
You have decent players like Malik Collins, but you saw what happened without Nick Bosa. It was bad. And Jordan Love tried to get them back in the game. He threw them a couple. And they dropped it. They couldn't make those plays. And what worries me about that, when you look at that missing tackles, when you look at 2 back-to-back 12 men on the field penalties, it comes to coaching. And on the chat, Jeff said, "Do you guys think Sorensen is one and done? Has he looked? He has looked over his head this season." His head.
Yeah.
Well, anything you're going to say about Sorensen, say it about Brandon Staley too. Because what is Brandon Staley doing in the background? He's here to help game plan for the defense. He's not sitting there like, Nick, let me know what you need. He's the assistant head coach for defense or whatever the hell his title is.
Yeah.
He has his fingerprints all over this. And we talked at the beginning of the season, if you know the movie Rounders, that like he was going to be like Worm for Kyle Shanahan, where he's taking him to Vegas, just ruining. You look at Kyle. Kyle's got the mullet. He's got the beard. Maybe he is. Maybe he's driving down to Vegas 3 times a week with Staley and Sorensen. Have you seen Brandon Staley? Does he have a mullet too? Because Sorensen and
I don't believe he does.
Maybe they all got the mullets. They're all scruffy and they're just out in Vegas. They're losing all their money and whatever else they're doing. It's the only thing that explains it, because this team is poorly coached. And one thing about the Niners, you always said in previous seasons, they're a well-coached team. Shanahan's guys are getting head coaching jobs. This team is poorly coached. They're missing tackles on defense. Special teams don't even get me started. I'm waiting for every day is rock bottom there. What did they have? 3 special teams penalties in this game?
Yep.
Even when they have a big play with Debo, 80 some odd yard return, it gets called back, whether you want to say that was a hold or not, but still. And that offensively too, anytime they do anything offensively, there's a penalty.
Yeah.
So they on no side of the ball, any of the 3 phases, do they look well coached? Injuries are there. But they are not being coached up by any stretch of imagination.
It feels like, it feels like one of the things, like I agree, they're not well coached. And, I don't think the 49ers have to be worried at all about anybody coming in to poach anybody from this coaching staff. But here's what I do think is that we're finally feeling all of the effects of all of the quality coaches being sniped and poached from this 49ers team.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a dearth of coaching talent because all of it has been scooped up by other teams, because the 49ers have been wildly successful since 2019. I think that is one of the issues that we're seeing, is that, again, there's just a lack of coaching talent on this team. I would argue that if you were to say, like, who is the best assistant coach on this team, I don't know. I mean, Chris Kasurik, I think, would probably be that guy, but who else? Like, who else? Not even the defensive coordinator is not anybody that anybody's going to want. And somebody, Steve-O in the chat also said, Peters and Rand Carthen, right? So even in the, the GM side, right, talent is being poached from this team.
Yeah.
And it just feels like that's where we're at, right? Like we've reached the point where all of the outside influences, players demanding bigger contracts, players wanting huge extensions, coaching talent getting poached, front office talent getting poached, all of it just feels like this season is a culmination of all of that. And the question then becomes, or it is now incumbent upon Kyle Shanahan to make some changes in the offseason, because you can't just run this back now. You cannot just run it back. They're not in that position anymore. This was the last hurrah, if you will, and it has been an abject disaster. And players that should be stepping up aren't. I would say the only player this season that is playing better or even as good as he did last year as George Kittle. Nobody else is playing
And
anywhere
Jennings.
near. And Juwan Jennings, thank you.
Yeah.
Juwan Jennings is, obviously that's a great point. So Jennings and Kittle. Literally everyone else, including guys like Fred Warner and Nick Bosa, are underperforming for what they're being paid, for what what we expect to see from them. And Kyle Shanahan is under coaching, if you will. Like,
he's had his worst season.
I just like some of the decisions that he's made, and like the fact that Jake Brendel is still the starting center makes zero sense to me. That guy sucks. He absolutely
Banks
sucks.
Killed them.
What are we doing?
Check
John
out
Feliciano is ready. Like, what are we doing? Also, why is Brandon Allen starting with a broken finger on his non-throwing hand when you've got a guy who's fully healthy in Josh Dobbs? Like, again, a decision where I'm like, I don't understand. Now, was Brandon Allen the reason why they didn't win yesterday? No, he's not. But it still is process, right? Like, what goes into a decision like that? So, someone just said they just kept Feliciano on IR. They put him back on IR.
Yeah, he said he's not ready to come out. He tweeted something like if this is the end, I had a good run or whatever. Father Time is undefeated. Yeah, okay. So he's done this year.
So there you go. So Brendel stays because there's no one else. And that's another failure of Kyle Shanahan and Chris Foerster. And that's a guy that I also think should be gone, because again, if you're the guy in charge of the line and you're saying, hey, Jake Brendel is our best option, I don't know how much faith I have in you moving forward. And also look at the teams that are dominating right now. Look at the Eagles, look at the Lions, look at the Packers, look at what do they all have in common? Dominant offensive lines. So if your offensive line coach is saying like, no, I don't need top tier guys. I just need guys that, you might be able to find in the third or fourth round, because I'd rather, focus our attention on the skill players. Quarterback can't get the ball to your skill players if you can't give them a clean pocket. So again, I don't understand that thought process at all. And the run game is shit. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's figured out. Like it is. You have nothing in that department now.
Well, and a lot of that,
like, holy cow.
Johnny Dells at JONNYDELS. He does a lot of good film breakdown. He's got a good YouTube station. He breaks down film, and he's been putting stuff. I've been looking at it today on Twitter. Banks and Brendel killed them in this game.
Yes.
They were awful. And he points it out, and he's got his pencil, and he's showing you about how many times Brendel and Banks just got pushed back or missed their blocks, or there was a lane and it just closed because the guys they were trying to block shut off them really quickly. They were atrocious in this game. Absolutely terrible. And yeah, you look at the way the Niners, we've gone over these drafts that they've had. I know people like the draft that they looks like they got some good players in this last draft. But if you look at the previous three, you got Purdy and Lenore that are impact guys. That's really it. And even the draft that we just saw, how many of these guys are going to be, again, I always talk about legit blue chip Hall of Fame type guys. Because the Niners are built on Hall of Fame type guys. They got a lot. They've had a lot of them. The other issue is they're getting older. So this isn't a team where you're like, oh, all right, Debo's 25 and whatever. Debo looks like he's 100 years old out there. These guys are getting older, and they've played long seasons for the last 5 years. It takes the toll on your body. And the people they have drafted, they have not drafted well in the trenches. They don't have any impact players in the trenches lately. And even this last draft class, other than Pooney, you're talking about people you're excited about. You hope Pearsall, even though he hasn't had a catch the last 2 games. Mustafa's a safety. Green is a corner. And yeah, these guys can help. But other than Pooney, who had a rough game yesterday, but he's been very good, nothing they got this past year is going to help you in the trenches. And nothing they had in the previous 3 years are going to help you in the trenches. And where you're getting your asses kicked and where teams win football games is in the trenches. So great. I'm glad you got a couple receivers you like, and I'm glad you feel good about the back end. If your offensive line and your front seven keeps playing the way that they're playing, I don't give a shit what you have on the outside, because like you said, you're not gonna be able to even get the ball off to your receivers because there's going to be so much pressure. And you saw one of the things Purdy can do is run around and make plays happen with his legs, and Allen can't really do that. Right. And you saw that yesterday. Plays that were there to be made just got blown up because the offensive line was so bad. The Niners have done a bad job the last 4 years replenishing this team. They just have. Yeah. And they've put all their money in the bank saying like, all right, we're going to pay our guys and keep our guys around, but they're getting old. So you have Debo and Williams and Bosa's in his prime, but McCaffrey, these guys are getting old. And Christian McCaffrey, I'm sorry. I hope that he's just playing himself into shape, because if not, running backs fall off a cliff, dude. And right now he looks like he's falling off a cliff.
Yeah. And again, I can't begin to question what it is, right? Because we're talking about a guy who obviously didn't have a training camp, is not in football shape, has not had a ton of reps since the Super Bowl. He was going to start slow. To think that he wouldn't, I think is asinine, which is why it's so frustrating that Kyle Shanahan just continues to build a game plan as if Christian McCaffrey is 100%. And not only that, but again, for whatever reason, just refuses to let Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerrero carry the ball more than once or twice a game. Like, it just, again, you watched McCaffrey against Green Bay, and then you watched Jordan Mason on his one run, and Jordan Mason's one run looked better than every single run that McCaffrey had since he's been back. And so again, it's just, the frustration really lies with just Kyle Shanahan's stubbornness and Kyle Shanahan's just seeming inability to move off of players, even though anyone with eyeballs can see that they're ineffective. And that goes with McCaffrey and that goes with Debo. I'm done with Debo Samuel. I'm done with him on my team. I wish Jake Moody would have walked up to Debo Samuel yesterday and been like, Debo, lock in, right? Because that's exactly what Debo did to Moody. And it's like, you are a wide receiver. You cannot have shitty hands. And he does. His hands suck. And that ball went right through his hands. That interception went right through his hands. That is not Brandon Allen's fault in the slightest. That is Debo Samuel's fault 100%. And then to refuse to talk to reporters after the game, like, what a bitch move. Weak. Like, what are we? Be a grown man. Be a grown man and answer questions that are going to be difficult. You cannot act the way that Debo acts and not take any accountability. But I think one of the biggest issues from this team is outside of Brock Purdy. I don't see very many players. Oh, sorry, Brock Purdy and Fred Warner. Outside of those two players, I don't see many players taking accountability. I don't see Kyle Shanahan taking accountability. I don't see it. And I don't see, I just, like, it seems like it's kind of a culture issue. Like, we're not taking accountability for anything, right? And it feels like that's been the case for most of this Shanahan tenure, is a lack of accountability when things are going poorly. They're just lucky that things not lucky. I mean, they've been a good team, but things have gone well because they've been winning. But when you're not winning, that's when you have to take accountability. And so far, no one is doing that. And that's frustrating to me.
So Emmanuel Ocho from FS1 was talking about Kyle Shanahan. He said it's the most disappointing season in the Kyle Shanahan era. Kyle Shanahan looks like he's mismanaged the staff, he's mismanaged the roster, and he's mismanaged the offense. I'll first start with the staff. You fired Steve Wilks because there was a lack of personality and personnel fit. Okay. You fired Steve Wilks, but he had the number 3 defense in football. Now Nick Sorensen has like the 25th best defense in football. I think it's 16th as of right now, but his point is that it's not as good.
Sure.
Yesterday, the Niners allowed 38 points in a regular season game for the first time in 37 games since the Chiefs did so on October of 2022. So you mismanaged the staff. Now let's talk about the players, Ocho went on to say. You and Brandon Ayuk have this tension, so much so that we see him taking off his shorts at practice because he's wearing different colored shorts. He wants to get paid. He doesn't get paid. Debo Samuel, he's choking the snappers during the game, and nothing is spoken of it. So you mismanage the staff, you mismanage the roster, and you mismanage, lastly, the offense. This offense, this prolific offense, in a world where the Detroit Lions are running up scores, running a ton of trick plays, in a world where offenses are changing protections, in a world where quarterbacks are being protected, this offense looks stagnant.
Yeah.
So that was pretty I think it's pretty accurate.
Acho's been a big cheerleader of the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan. It's not like he's been a consistent hater. He has been a cheerleader and defender of this team for a long time now. He loves to talk about the 49ers.
But you got to call it like it is.
Right.
It's been a bad
100%. 100%. And
Kyle's had a bad season in a lot of ways.
And, I just watched that game and I watched the Green Bay offense and I go, it's evident the type of creativity and the type of explosion that they're getting in that offense. And then the 49ers offense trots out there and it looks like a JV team versus a varsity team. And the Green Bay defense is fine. It's not amazing. And to muster 10 points when you still have Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings and Jordan Mason, right? Like you still have all of your skill players and there was zero creativity. The one creative play was an explosive play, and that was that double flea flicker. And I was like, hey, awesome. Like that's cool. That's creative. Like, where is that? Where are the screens to Deebo? It's obvious that Deebo can't run routes. Where are the screens and the drags and slants? Like what?
I was watching him a lot in the game because let's get to Deebo. It's really interesting you brought that up because I was going to say something about that too. Deebo's got 5 catches for 22 yards in the last 2 games. And Deebo is that kind of on the every other year plan anyway, where his rookie season, 57 catches, 802 yards. He had 900 and how much? 961 total scrimmage yards and 6 touchdowns. Excellent rookie season. Next season, he's banged up, 417 yards, 1 touchdown. 2021 was really his only prolific season, 770 total yards, 14 total touchdowns. Then the next season was his contract when he came in out of shape, 864 total yards and 5 touchdowns. Last year was a bit of a bounce back, 1,100 total yards and 12 total touchdowns. A good season. And this year he's been bad, 590 yards and two total touchdowns. So he's kind of on the every other year thing. And you mentioned the screens. I was watching him. There were numerous times where Deebo kind of trotted out through the screen and the defense just goes right there. They just run right out and cover him because they've seen it a million times. Yeah. They know it's coming, Same thing with the sweep when he gets it. All right, it isn't working anymore. And my issue with Deebo, again, you have your contract thing, you come in out of shape. You played that whole game, and I stuck up for him with the incident with Tabor Pepper and Jake Moody. Sure. He said this stuff happens on the sideline all the time. We don't always see it. Not the end of the world, but he is a captain, and if you lose your temper, how do you respond from that? You got to make it right. He goes into this game and he doesn't want to talk to the media. After 3 of your top players were out in this game, you just got embarrassed. You did nothing. You dropped 2 balls, one of which really changed the momentum in the game when it bounced off your hands for an interception when it was 17-7, and you guys may have been able to start making it a game out of it. And you decided not to talk to the media. That's fucking Bush League, dude.
Yeah.
That is absolute Bush League. He has to come out and he's got to stand at his locker and he's got to be a captain and he's got to answer the questions.
Got to wear it. That's the C on your chest.
Just to be like, nah, I'm not going to talk to the media. Give me a break. He whether he's going to be on this team or not next season, he has a lot to show in the next, 5 games, 6 games, whatever it is, about why he's a captain and how he can lead the team. Because right now, again, a lot of fans and a lot of people are like, all right, man, this is bullshit, dude. you know what I mean? Like, come up and be a leader. Like, you have to be there for your teammates, and to not talk to the media yesterday, I thought was trash.
Let me ask you this question. If the 49ers put Deebo Samuel on the trading block this offseason, what do you think is the best return that they could hope for?
I mean, your mid-round pick, maybe.
Mid-round being what? What do you think the highest pick they could get?
4th.
I agree. I think that I think 4th round would be like top best case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's like a 5th rounder.
Yeah,
with the contract and the way he has played this season. So then I look at it and go, well, they restructured him, right? Which means that the out that they had after this season is essentially gone, unless you cut him as a post June 1st cap casualty, like they did with Eric Armstead this past season. If they do that, then they get $10 million. But the problem is you don't get that $10 million till after June 1st. So it doesn't help them in the most important part of the offseason, which is the beginning of free agency. But here's the other situation that they find themselves in is, can you we don't think that Deebo Samuel is a good wide receiver anymore. I feel like that's a fair statement, just based on his play this season. But you're going to be without Brandon Ayuk until at least midseason, if not more. I was talking to my buddy. He's a chiropractor, and I went in to get an adjustment today, and I didn't realize this, but the type of knee injury that Brandon Ayuk suffered was called the terrible triad, and it's typically seen more in soccer than any other sport because of slide tackles. But it's when your knee gets hit and moved inside, and it tears the ACL, the MCL, and the meniscus, and that's the three. That's what happened to Brandon Ayuk. They didn't realize the meniscus tear until they went in to repair it, and that's where they saw it. So they had to repair that as well. That is a very, very difficult injury to come back from, and you have no idea what that player is going to look like once recovered. So do you go into next season, you cut Deebo Samuel post June 1, and you've got Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, and who else? Jacob Cowing can't see the field for whatever reason. Chris Conley, like maybe you draft another wide receiver, but Kyle Shanahan doesn't typically like to play rookie wide receivers. So then you got to go find somebody, right? But I don't know that Deebo Samuel helps this team anymore. Like, what is his role? What does he do? What does he do to help this team win? What does he do to help the offense? I don't feel like he does very much anymore. He is not a productive player. So do you just bite the bullet and cut him? Or do you put him on the trade block and hope for a 4th or 5th rounder? I don't know what the answer is, but I'm kind of done seeing Deebo Samuel on the 49ers.
He's not worth the money anymore. I mean, if it's a situation where like he was a free agent and he's going to come back on a short-term deal for less money, you say, oh, all right, let's see if we can catch lightning in a bottle with him or something. But to pay him what you're going to pay him for the production you're getting doesn't make any sense. And the production they've got, and again, injuries play a role, but they've played Deebo, Ayuk, and McCaffrey have played 20 games this season total. They have 2 touchdowns between the 3 of them in 20 combined games. If I told you that before the season, you'd say, well, wait, hold on. We're 11 games in. They've only played 20 games combined. That's a problem. And they only have 2 touchdowns. We're not very good. It'd be a miracle if we're 5-6 with that. People wouldn't have seen Jennings coming on the way that he has, but it's crazy how little production they've had. And McCaffrey, we're all hoping that he's just working his way back, knowing in the back of our minds that running backs, it can go away quickly. But since he's been back, Brian, he's 149 yards on 43 carries. It's 3.46 yards per carry. He's been held to 39 yards or less in 2 of the 3 games. And like I said, he hasn't scored a TD, and he scored a TD in 13 of 16 games last season. So the one game that he did have decent numbers, we had 79 yards. If you take away one of the runs he had at the end of the half where he gained 13 yards, his numbers look even worse. And I believe he's only had 2 rushes over 10 yards out of those 43 attempts. In Jordan Mason, if you take out the 2 garbage time attempts yesterday, his only run was for 16 yards. And again, he looks shot out of a cannon. And I'm not saying take McCaffrey, play Mason over McCaffrey. Right. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is find a way to use them both. There's no reason you can't use them both. And in a game like yesterday, when it is 17-7 or it's close, any close game that you're in, just pound Mason. Pound Mason where he can wear the defense down a little bit. And then maybe McCaffrey can hit one. Yeah, when he comes in. So it doesn't make any sense to me that Kyle is just, again, it just looks like he's banging his head against the wall, just trying to do the same thing over and over again that isn't working. I don't understand it. So it's been really, really frustrating. We said Larry Krueger said he could see Shanahan stepping down because he's so burnt out. I'm burnt out. We're burnt out. The fan base is burnt out, but Kyle does look burnt out, and Kyle has not been himself this year. I don't know that he's going to step down, but he needs a vacation or something's got to happen. But this is just this whole season, this whole team, not the whole team, but a lot of them look disinterested, look tired, look old, look beaten up, look defeated. They're blowing games. They haven't beat anybody good. Good team they played against with winning record. They've gotten like Minnesota's a good team. They beat them pretty soundly. The Chiefs are a good team. They destroyed them, and the Packers are a good team. They destroyed them. So what you beat a Bucks team that was decimated that you would probably lose to if they had Mike Evans.
Yeah.
If they had their corners in that game. So it's tough to make anything out of this team. They just look old and slow and disinterested and very mid. And moving forward, I don't know that there are answers. I don't know what the answers are moving forward, because if you have to stick with a lot of the same guys, again, we love the draft class, but how many guys out of this draft class? Ask yourself this question. We like the draft class as part of a team and you have some starters and things like that. But how many of those guys in that draft class do you think can step in next year and help carry the team the way a Fred Warner does, or George Kittle does, or Ayuk did when he was healthy, or McCaffrey when he was healthy, whoever? I don't know if any of them can. They can be contributors, but to carry the team, and the Niners are built on 8 or 9 dudes who could carry the team. Oh, they're losing those guys.
Jeff said the 49ers look like Mike Tyson against Jake Paul.
Well, even, Mike Tyson was pulling his punches at least. At least he could have.
Yeah.
He probably could have won that if he wanted to. This is just, it's super frustrating. And Kyle, again, it's like you're seeing this is not the person we know. This is not the coach that we know. The 49ers are generally a well-coached team. This is a poorly coached team. And he doesn't have his fastball this year. He just doesn't. So hope it's a bad year, but there's a lot going on here, man. There has to be more than meets the eye, I feel like, because this team just looks disheveled and done.
Well, and like I said, you have to wonder if for Kyle Shanahan, we're finally the attrition of the coaching staff being poached by other teams is finally like rearing its head with Kyle, because, you look at that and go and think about, like, you've got 3 guys right now that are running offenses in the NFL that were part of that offensive scheming and game planning, triad there, right? With Mike McDaniel, Bobby Slowick, and I don't know if it's Clint or Clay that's in New Orleans. I'm not positive. But say what you want, but everywhere that Kyle has been, he's been surrounded by the majority of those guys. And Mike LaFleur was another one, right? He lost his job, but he's now the offensive coordinator technically in LA with the Rams. But he was surrounded by all those guys, right? And it was kind of a, Shanahan was the head, right? But they were in those meetings, and like you look at some of these offenses and you go, there's the creativity that we used to see, right, out of San Francisco and out of Kyle Shanahan. So that I think that's a valid concern about the coaching staff being just depleted and not restocked with promising coaches. One of the things that we talked about when it came to, like, what are the things that Kyle Shanahan is good at is, we said finding coaching talent, and he may have hit a wall there in terms of this coaching staff that he put together. But I don't know. But here's the thing. There's so much talent on this team. Even with the injuries, right? Bosa will be back more than likely, right? Brock Purdy's probably going to be back this week. But honestly, like, there's enough talent on this team that they could shock the world next week and beat Buffalo and then just go on a run. Like, that is still a possibility. I don't believe that it will happen, but that is definitely one of the possibilities. I was listening to the Ringer NFL show, their Sunday night recap, and one of the segments they did was cooked contender or playoff pretender. And it was, is this team cooked? Like, they're just done for the season. Are they an actual contender? Like, they could be in championship weekend. And then are they a playoff pretender? And one of the teams that they played that game with was the 49ers. And both Steven Ruiz and Shio Kapadia and even Deontay Lee all basically said, like, they're not cooked yet because of the amount of talent on that team. At any point, something can click or something can go their way, and all of a sudden they get some momentum. And you look at some of these teams and you go, if San Francisco can just get in, I think all bets are off, right? Just with the amount of experience they have in postseason play, and the relative weakness of the NFC outside of Detroit. Because I'll be perfectly honest, Green Bay won 38-10. I was not all that impressed with Green Bay. I would be interested to know how that game would have went if Brock Purdy was the quarterback. I think it would have gone differently.
Oh, sure.
But I don't. I think Jordan Love is still figuring things out. Josh Jacobs looks phenomenal and looked phenomenal against the 49ers. But again, the 49ers run defense isn't that good, and we knew that. So I'm not all that impressed with Green Bay. Like I said, I feel like the Eagles look like they're kind of a monster now. I think they've gotten some things figured out, and it looks like
Saquon's doing for them what McCaffrey did for the Niners right now.
Yeah, and then Vic Fangio has put together a pretty impressive defense there. So, that would be, but outside of Philly and Detroit, I don't see a ton of reason to be, if the 49ers got in, like there's not a path for them. So it's a frustrating season. And it's like, do I even want them to make the playoffs? Because that affects their draft position. Like, I would almost rather them not make the playoffs and have a higher draft pick with the opportunity to find an impact player in the first round in the trenches specifically. If they go anywhere else, I'm going to be pissed. But I don't know. But I'll tell you what, I watched that game and I was not mad at all. And it's because they've broken me. And now I can watch it.
I don't feel anymore
and just be like, it is what it is. Oh, well,
their saving grace is that the division is so mid. It's just four really mid teams.
Yeah.
What is it? 6-5 now, Arizona and Seattle are. And you look at their schedules. If they ended up 10-7, I wouldn't be surprised. If they ended up 8-9, I wouldn't be surprised. So the Niners can sneak in and maybe win the division at 9-8. Now that's very difficult because they're 1-3 in the division and they're 3-5 in the conference. It's going to be very difficult. But if they beat the Rams and the Cardinals head to head, it's 7 wins, and then you got to beat Miami and you have to beat Chicago, and then maybe you can sneak in at 9-8 and you could win that division. I don't know, but right now, again, the way they're playing, it sounds ridiculous to even right now. I'm concerned. Are you going to get to 7 wins? Can you get to 8 wins the way that they're playing? And if Purdy and Bosa don't play on Sunday, I mean, it's going to be a disaster. They're not going into Buffalo and doing anything with Brandon Allen and without Nick Bosa on defense. So if you're 5-7, man, I
honestly, like, I don't care who is quarterback. They're not winning that game. They're not winning against Buffalo. Probably now, will they shock the world? Maybe, but I have zero reason to believe that they can beat the Bills. The team I'm more scared of is the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks are actually better positioned to win the West, but they also have a fairly difficult schedule. They play the Jets this week.
Had a good season.
Yeah, they play the Jets this week, but then they play the Cardinals and the Packers and the Vikings and the Bears, and then they end their season with the Rams. So
again, if they ended up 8-9, I wouldn't be surprised. Right. Like any of these teams, I thought the Rams were going to be able to make a run, but I don't know anymore. And they got dogged.
They got stomped. What I think, excuse me, what I think has really elevated the Seahawks is it certainly seems like the second half with Mike Macdonald is exactly what we saw with the second half of Mike Macdonald with the Ravens, where it took a half a season to kind of get comfortable with a scheme that's pretty complicated in terms of, responsibilities and things like that. But it certainly seems like, this is a team that literally like replaced their entire linebacking core midseason. Like, you don't see something like that usually. Like, they traded for Ernest Jones, and there's another guy they brought in, and they've just completely changed their starting linebacking core, and it's made a huge difference. But yeah, like I said, I know that this 49ers team could go on a run just because of, again, just the talent that they have, and it is there, but I haven't seen anything this season to tell me that can or will happen.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk tomorrow with our buddy John Chapman, who is always really optimistic, or usually optimistic. So if he's down in the dumps, I don't know what we're gonna do, but we'll see what he's got to say tomorrow. It's gonna be tomorrow at 3:30. We'll be talking to him 3:30 Pacific. You could join us on live on YouTube, or you can just wait for the pod when it comes out, either later tomorrow or on Wednesday. Until then, like, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For Brian, I'm Al.
Later.